Good evening. This is the fourth in our series, and it's on the fourth step of Alcoholics Anonymous. It kind of gets really serious now because the looks and the thoughts turn inward. In the first three, we were we did look inward, obviously, but we were focusing on this God out there. Now the addict looks at self. AA, in its 12 principles, lays down a perfect pattern of how to live. Prepare before you execute. For example, admit you're sick, take on the rules to get well. Come into a room and look, come to believe you can get that way. Make a decision to turn your life over to God, spend the rest of your life doing it. Now the alcoholic, the drug addict, is asked to take an inventory of self. In the fifth step, make it known. Become willing to have defects removed, ask to have them removed. Make a list and become willing to make amends, ask to do it. It is a classic, almost architectural pattern of living. Now, Dr. Bob summarized all 12 steps into these 6 words. Steps 1, 2, and 3, trust God. Steps 4 through 11, clean house. Step 12, help others. Isn't it significant that the major portion of the 12 steps has to do with correcting what's wrong in here? Immediately after sobriety, I can't handle it, God can, I think I'll get in touch. Now comes the cleanup act. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Ladies and gentlemen, there is not a therapy on earth as complete as AA is. It's almost popular in the so-called scientific world to deny what we call the spiritual life, the world of morality and everything else. We are no more than animals who determine our own destiny. There is such a thing as morality. Wherever you see this word, moral, it has to do with the rightness or wrongness of human behavior. And AA was the first purely scientific organization on earth to recognize that the moral side of the human animal has to be faced and handled if we are to achieve any kind of mental, spiritual, mental, emotional health. Please make this distinction or you'll just drag your heels in the mud. The disease is not immoral. That happens. The disease is a purely physical thing. It is a biochemical addiction to a drug. It results in added damage to the mind, emotions, and soul. And so we call it a threefold disease of body, mind, and soul. The behavior of the addict is always, to a greater or lesser degree, immoral. And that's why we're asked to take a moral inventory so we can correct those things. The disease is not immoral. That happens. What it makes us do is pretty bad. You've all heard family therapists go into what happens. Infidelity, incest, wife abuse, child abuse, husband abuse, emotional battering, spiritual damage, name it, it's all there. Who but the alcoholic gets drunk and takes his daughter to bed? Who but the alcoholic shows up drunk at her mother's funeral? Who but the alcoholic is drunk at the daughter's graduation? Who but the alcoholic alienates his kids to such a degree that they're afraid to bring their schoolmates home? You could go on forever. I was in a Midwestern state, and I gave that talk about family and all the horrible things that happen as a result of this disease in the lives of others. A woman came up to me afterwards. She said, "Father, you missed one." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" She said, "My husband was a good man from the beginning. He was a good man when he drank. But," she said, "never abused us physically, never abused us verbally, never abused us financially. We never wanted for a dime. However, He drank and slept. He just disappeared from this family and lived in a world of unconsciousness. He didn't pick up one responsibility toward this family at all. He drank and slept. The behavior of the addict is always immoral. You know what the alcoholic and the drug addict is now asked to do? It's not to wipe that out, that's there. It's to resolve the guilt of the past, because you cannot live with guilt sober. Dr. Bob proved this in the very beginnings of AA. He and Bill got together. They started this thing unconsciously. And he went on a medical seminar or something in Atlantic City, and he drank. And he realized that he could not stay sober until he cleaned up his past, because he said it's impossible to look at it through sober eyes and be able to stand it. And this is why, my friends, right after steps 1, 2, and 3, this comes right away. He did that. He took a moral inventory of his life. He admitted to God, himself, and another human being, and he was able to go on. In a lot of treatment centers, you hear counselors say things like, "You got to get rid of the garbage." And they have you write out all of your past sins, put them in a bag, and go and burn the bag. Does nothing. You will never get rid of your past. It's there. Mine is there. Yours is there. You cannot change one iota of it, and you don't get rid of it. What you do is resolve the guilt about it. A good friend of mine, a man from whom I learned most of what I know, said this. He said, after I got well and I did my 4th and 5th steps, he said, I could walk into practically any hotel in the land. He was a writer. He used to write for newspapers. And he said, under any potted palm could be an old doozer who could look me right in the eye and say, Ripley, you are an SOB. And he said, I'd look him right back in the eye and say, everything you say about me was true. No more. Unresolved remorse will destroy you. And so we are asked to take an inventory. That's a very wise word. You know what we're asked to do? We're asked to try to find out what this is, this I that I've spoken about all my life. Every one of us in this room, my friends, is 3. I am who you think I am. 16,000 miles off center. I am who I think I am. A little bit closer. I've lived with me for a lot of years. The third me is the real me. And very often in the life of any individual, the real me escapes oneself for a lot of years until honesty sets in. Have you ever honestly believed that all your misery is caused by everybody else? The wife, the husband, the children, the circumstances, the neighborhood, the family, the weather, anything. I'm not responsible for me or the goofy state I'm in. It's always somebody else's fault. There was a couple went to West Point once to watch their kid graduate. The entire Corps was marching by. The wife nudges the husband and says, isn't that wonderful, Henry? 4,000 cadets and our little Georgie is the only one in step. Well, I mean, when the whole world's out of step with me, maybe I am. You know what you're asked to do in treatment? Look into a mirror and keep staring till you see what's there. You pare away what everybody thinks about and you look at yourself, honestly, starkly. That is why they use these 2 words. Searching. Fearless. Right or wrong list of what I've done in my life. And you know what I'm going to discover? What every human being has to. The good, the bad, and the ugly. What I've got, what I haven't got, and what has to go. I've got talents and so do you. Don't hand me this phony humility. Oh, I'm a nothing. You know. See, this is a good. No, This is the goofiness of the alcoholic or the drug addict when he comes into treatment. His estimation of self is so low that it is not accurate. It's not accurate. Have you ever met the phony humility of people? Okay, you go to an AA meeting, some guy gives a brilliant talk, and you go up to him after and say, God, that was magnificent. You really helped me. And he says, oh, it was really off the cuff. I wasn't really prepared. Next time you hear that, just say, geez, you know, on second thought, it did stink. You want to find out if somebody's on it. You know what really kills me? You get one of these absolutely luscious, beautiful young starlets appears on the Johnny Carson show. Oh, I've always been an ugly duckling. My left side's my bad one, you know. That's as phony as it can get. The next time you hear someone knocking himself, agree. Just agree. Did you ever go to a party, you want to sing songs, and there's a piano player there, and you say, hey, would you mind playing for us? Oh, I don't play very well. Just say, excuse me, I thought you did, and walk away. Seriously, you'll find out that there's a whole lot of phoniness in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, humility is not a denial of truth, it is stark truth. God grant me the serenity to accept every gift and talent that He has given me. The courage to accept it and want to use it as it ought to be used, and the wisdom to know how. I've got plenty of talents, and so do you. Did it ever occur to you that maybe you were handpicked for sobriety because there's something in you God wants to use? To deny what God has given you is to insult Him. It's almost to spit in His face and say, no, you didn't. There are a lot of things I don't have. Have you ever found no talent people that, a person that thinks he can sing and can't? There's a friend of mine, he said whenever he got drunk, he sang. He thought he was the world's gift to the operatic world. On one of his last drunks, somebody taped him and played it to him the next day, and he left for Tahiti. I've got a lot, and there's a lot that I don't have that other people do. I've got to find out what I've got because the good Lord's going to ask me to use it someday to help somebody else. And you know, if we're honest enough, and humility is stark truth. If I recognize what I've got and I recognize what you've got and we pool our resources, maybe together we can help somebody else. But the real me, I am asked to find out what that real me is and who he is. What's a moral inventory? If you don't know how to take one, get one of the marvelous pamphlets they have out. Try the 10 Commandments. I think we all function according to those rules. Live and let live. Do unto others and then cut out. Do unto others and then as you would have them do unto you. Take these normal rules of human behavior. I think that there are pamphlets out that have an entire examination of self that is very thorough and very complete. Get one. Go through it. Be honest enough to acknowledge these things. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're like me, I've done some wonderful things in my life. I've done a lot of things I'm very proud of. I've done an awful lot of things I'm terribly ashamed of. And I have failed to do a whole lot of things. All I'm asked to do is to list them so that somewhere along the line I can find the real me. There was on Sunday afternoon they used to have something about the National Football League, and it was like an hour to a half hour before the games. And one Sunday they had the hobbies of some of the players, and one of the San Francisco 49ers used to buy old farmhouses about 100 years old and restore them and live in them until the bug bit again. He'd buy another one and restore it, and they'd live in it. But you know the very first thing he did when he bought a house? He had to find out what it had, what it didn't have, and what had to go. And he found out what it had: a few good timbers, a good chimney. It didn't have, let's say, a solarium or a sun deck or whatever. And he found out all the rotten things that had to go. When he cleared that out, he could then begin to rebuild. And I think that a lot of you have come into treatment. There's a lot of damage there. There's a lot of good there. Let's find out what it is that we have to build on and do the building. But please remember, it takes great courage to do this step, and we get the strength to do anything from a power greater than ourselves. All we have to do is cooperate with it. Thank you and good night. Good evening. This is the fifth, pardon the expression, segment of our series. And it has to do with the fifth step of AA, considered by some to be the most difficult. I once heard a man say that the value of steps 4 and 5 will come only after they are done. If people could realize the import of these steps, there'd be no question about their doing them. Many people fight these steps, bring up all kinds of lame-brained excuses for not doing them for many years. And I believe that the basic reason people do not do them is pure fear. Simple, pure fear. They're difficult. They're horribly difficult. This one is a real dilly, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being. The exact nature of our wrongs. I think you can see from the very wording of the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous that it is a deadly serious, deadly painful set of things to do, and usually I think we have to attain some measure of a desire to be grown up in order to do them. They're tough, and this is perhaps the toughest of all. I have heard brave men and women say that they sweat bullets before doing this one. I heard a man ask a friend, a good friend of his, to hear his fifth step. And he said, I knew, even as I asked him if he would hear my fifth step, that after I had done it, I would have lost a friend. For he said, if anyone on this earth really knows me, they wouldn't speak to me. Well, of course, the opposite happened, because for that man it took a great deal of humility to do his fifth step at all. We are asked to admit to God, because He's the one who established the moral law that we've kicked around. That shouldn't be too hard to do, because He knows anyway. To admit to ourselves is a little bit more difficult. It's a terrible thing to look yourself in the mirror and even try to say out loud, you are perhaps the most self-centered thing I've ever encountered. Awfully, awfully, awfully difficult to admit to self exactly what I am. To another human being? Come on. Even the great saints tried to tell us that they were the greatest sinners. Even the just man stumbles all over the place. You know what I've said so many times? It's hard to be good even when it's easy. Now, you drug your brain and drug your conscience for 10 or 15 years and see what kind of a pigsty you wind up in. You're asking me to admit to another human being the exact nature of my wrongs? Yes. Why? Because for some reason or other, it's healing. And nobody knows why except God established it that way. If you're ever going on a retreat or with a group of people, and you're usually out in some setting of maybe a religious house in the country where the setting is simply beautiful, and you're kind of walking on a hillside or a mountain or through the woods with somebody else, and you find yourself bearing your entire soul to somebody else, and somehow or other it cleans, it cleanses. You're all familiar with the fact that we Catholics have what we call the sacrament of penance, in which you go to a priest and tell your sins. And somehow or other, apart from the purely doctrinal and the spiritual end of it, the purely psychological part of it, bearing one's soul to another human being somehow or other, has a great cleansing and healing effect to it. But the doing of it is horrible. It's absolutely horrible. The exact nature of my wrongs. I keep my goodies to myself, what I've got, what I haven't got, and what has to go. I keep the good points to myself. This step has to do with cleaning up our wrongs. I share with another the exact nature of my wrongs. Now, how do I take this step? I ask another human being if he'll be willing to go through 6 or 8 weeks of nauseating. No. I ask another human being if he's willing to hear me. May I suggest that even though you can fulfill that step by asking anybody, if you want to gain something from your past, why not go to someone who understands the human soul and who can help you with your wrongs? We have made it possible for people to go to clergymen if they so choose. They may choose fellow AAs if they so choose. They can go to anybody, they can pick anybody. And that's the way it should be. That's called freedom of conscience. You should be free to choose the one person, an other, single human being to whom you bear your soul. How many of you in this room right here would want any human being, any other human being, any human being of your choice, some saint, your mother, some good friend, to see one single 24-hour period of your life on a screen? Every thought, every judgment. I've often said one of my favorite indoor sports is jumping to conclusions. We're all good at that. I wouldn't want you to see my best day up here. And we're asked to bear the exact nature of the wrongs of our entire lives to one other human being. Ladies and gentlemen, that is humiliating. It's horribly humiliating. But humiliation is the surest path to humility. It makes me see what I have become. And for what it's worth, and it's worth a tremendously great deal in the healing of a human soul, that for as long as he or she lives, there is one other human being on this earth that knows the real me. There's great therapy in that. And this isn't something that you can choose to do or not do. Bill and Dr. Bob came up with a skeletal plan of life of 12 things. Please believe this, please. They were interested in survival. And if it could be done on 10 steps, that's all there'd have been. If they could have done it on 4, that's all there would have been. These steps are essential. And I once heard a man say, I do not do them because they are nice. I do them because they are necessary. And the thing that is going to get you or anybody else on this earth well is this. You come to the doors of AA and you say, I want what you've got. And they say, if you want what we've got, then you do what we did. And if you can come into treatment or into AA with this attitude, I am here, I place myself in your hands, I will do whatever you suggest that I do, I truly believe that you can get well. But ladies and gentlemen, from this point on, you will breathe the clear air of decency again. You know the serenity prayer, we speak so much of serenity. In my opinion, serenity is nothing more than peace of conscience. I am now living the way I know God wants me to live. I've got to be peaceful about it. And so the rest of these steps, making amends, continuing to take inventory, praying, admitting being wrong, trying to help others, these things now are almost easy because I've climbed over the biggest hurdle of them all. I've let one other person in on the real me. There's great healing in that. And every human being who approaches the door of AA simply wants to be well, simply wants to be happy, wants to be free of despair, wants, like every soul that was ever created, to hope, wants to be good, and wants to share life with somebody else. There is almost a burning anxiety in every recovered addict to try to get every other addict well. You're like a swimmer who has just burst the surface of the water after having been submerged to a point where you think your lungs would burst. You're breathing the free air of sobriety. You're like the thirsty man who is drinking of the well of sobriety. You're like the blind man who is being given the sight of a beautiful garden of sobriety. And God, how you want everybody to have it. I hope that it will be yours. It can be. All it takes is a desire to be well, a willingness to do what needs to be done, and the ability to count from 1 to 12. Good night.